It's a different use of machine learning from collecting, storing, and then modeling observational data, because the idea is that the data that's used to train a neural network would come from the solution to the equation of science rather than from observation.
Welcome to How AI Happens, a podcast where experts explain their work at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. You'll hear from AI researchers, data scientists, and machine learning engineers as they get technical about the most exciting developments in their field and the challenges they're facing along the way. I'm your host, Rob Stevenson, and we're about to learn how AI happens. Here with me today on How AI Happens is the Senior Director over at Microsoft's AI for Science, Dr. Bonnie Kruft. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Really pleased to have you. You are dialing in from London, where it is a somber state after the Queen has passed. We just got some color commentary on the royals and the mood over there, which I appreciated. But at a certain point here, we had to start talking about AI. So we'll save our listeners from that. You know, there's a lot of other podcasts people can listen to if they want takes on the monarchy. But in the meantime, Bonnie, really interested in learning more about you. I guess before we get too far along, would you share a little bit about your background and your research, and then we'll get into AI for Science and the goals of that campaign?
Certainly. So I did my Ph.D. in quantum chemistry, and there I applied density functional theory to explore the properties of transition metal complexes. So quantum chemistry is a branch of physical chemistry, and it's focused on applying quantum mechanics. So the fundamental theory in physics that describes the properties of molecules, materials, and solutions at the atomic level. So quantum chemistry is that applied to chemical systems. And density functional theory is one such approximation, and it's a tool for exploring molecular properties. It is really based on the theory that the exact energy can be determined from the knowledge of the electron density and can drive new and important insights into the way that molecules work.
How did that connect into AI? Why was that the next logical step for your career?
So during my PhD, I grew an interest in data science and machine learning. And I was also involved with a pharmaceutical contract research organization that was working on clinical studies at the time. And after my PhD, I went directly into the pharmaceutical industry. So I started with GSK, played a variety of roles there in data science and machine learning, and then eventually ended up at AstraZeneca, where I was leading a global data and AI team. So I had a team of about 150 data and machine learning engineers, and we were delivering all of the data and AI services for biopharm and oncology research.
So data science then was the bridge for you. In what ways, I guess, was the quantum chemistry background contributing to the pharmaceutical research and production?
So although I wasn't really working on machine learning or data science during my PhD, there's a lot of transferable skills that I picked up along the way while I was working on quantum chemistry. So it's really about how you use molecular simulation, computation, simulation, alongside experimental data and computational power to drive some insights into something that's particularly really complex. And that's pretty similar to the modeling of data, massive quantities of data, massive volumes of data, alongside computational powers to drive some insights into, say, the correlation between a gene and a disease, or the design of a small molecule that's going to modulate a disease target, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of transferable skills that I picked up during my PhD that were easy to kind of move and transition into the machine learning world and data science world. When I started at GSK, it was sort of the beginning stages of most pharma companies entering that sort of data-driven drug discovery world. So I was part of a small team that kind of acted like a startup within a big company. We were both trying to build something top-down, bottom-up, bring siloed data sources together, while at the same time trying to build something on top of it. And it was kind of that brute force of, how do we try something out? How do we build something at the same time? We're not really sure where we're going, but we're going to experiment and see where we can get to and inspire people to start to think about how we use data in a different way.
Would you say that, in your experience, the data science approach is now a driving factor, or is it merely a tool in the tool belt? How impactful is it? How top of mind and prioritized in driving innovation, at least in pharmaceuticals?
I think most pharmaceutical companies are making some sort of effort towards data-driven drug discovery. So data science being sort of a broader branch of I am collecting data and I'm going to drive insights into many components of the pipeline. Machine learning being a bit more robust and looking at how we can actually build systems that learn and impact and influence different components of the R&D pipeline too. So most companies are looking at how we can accelerate or augment or transform some step of the drug discovery process, whether that's doing something a little bit faster, whether that's reducing the number of failed experiments that you have in the lab, or really just increasing the probability of success that you're going to find the right target, the right molecule, the right patient that's actually going to end up becoming a medicine that makes it to the market and is successful.
It's interesting, those approaches you outlined, you rattled off a handful there. Those aren't necessarily pharmaceutical industry dependent. Like that just seems like standard sort of data science approach to problem solving. Is that fair to say?
I think you're probably right. It's really about making better decisions, which is probably what you're trying to do in every industry with data science and machine learning. How do I get to a better decision faster? Or how do I eliminate the wrong decision faster, which is oftentimes what we're trying to do. It's the concept of failing faster.
How do you fail faster, Bonnie?
So you fail faster by identifying what things aren't going to work, right? So in drug discovery, it's what molecule is going to have potentially off-target effects, or what synthetic route is going to be wasteful or expensive or end up failing in the long run or not being able to scale.
I see. I want to go back a little bit just because we've maybe jumped in the deep end here. I want to ask you, why quantum chemistry for you personally?
Why I chose quantum chemistry. My early career was, I kind of bounced around quite a little bit. So I studied chemistry for my undergraduate degree, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So someone told me, oh, you have a degree in chemistry. You can go make wine, you know? And I said, oh, okay. So I actually ended up going to Australia and New Zealand for about 2 years, working in a lab making wine. And then I kind of thought, I really do love chemistry and I'd like to go back and get my PhD. So I initially sought out to get my PhD in organic chemistry. And I found a professor that I wanted to work with in New York in an organic chemistry lab doing photochemistry. There happened to be a project there that was slightly more computational, and it was collaborating with the quantum chemistry professor in the same building. And so I started working with that person. And I guess I'd say I just fell in love with quantum chemistry at that point, and I couldn't get enough of it. I enjoyed kind of thinking about something a little bit more complex and a little bit more abstract, and how quantum mechanics can be applied to the world around us, and how we can use the concepts of physics and theoretical physics applied to real life molecules and reactions and drive insights into how they're actually working. So I worked on a couple of different projects during my PhD. As I said, they were all about transition metal complexes. One was on an enzyme that's used in the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. So it was really looking at sort of the finer detail of that enzyme and looking at certain mutations that had happened across the active site and using quantum mechanics to really learn what was happening there. What was the mutation actually doing? What was the outcome of that? And I guess, yeah, I just really enjoyed quantum chemistry from that. And then lucky for me, there was a lot of transferable skills that came from working in that field, which led me where I am today.
Whether it's quantum computing, quantum physics, quantum as a word is just something you can slap on any sci-fi story and it make it sufficiently advanced and futuristic. Would you mind outlining just a little bit of what you refer to as the abstraction and the theoretical nature of what we're talking about when we qualify something like chemistry or computing or physics with the word quantum?
Yeah, so anything that's referring back to quantum is most of the time referring back to quantum mechanics and quantum physics. So the laws that govern small things, the atomic level. So that applied to chemistry is, how do you apply the laws of quantum physics to molecules, right? The contrast to that would be something like classical physics, right? You are either modeling everything in terms of a ball and a spring, or you're modeling it in terms of the way that the electrons interact with each other. So it's a different scale. So when you're talking about quantum chemistry versus something like quantum computing is then applying the same sorts of principles, the theory of quantum physics, the theory of quantum mechanics to computing.
I see. Thank you for giving that context for me. The next time I want to watch an Avengers movie, I'll have a little more understanding. What were the things about your PhD that you said were transferable that made you well prepared for a career in data science, machine learning, and ultimately AI?
I think the number one thing was being able to explain something somewhat complex and abstract to your stakeholders. During my PhD, I was working with, so as I was applying my quantum chemistry calculations to this enzyme that's applied to the bacteria, I also had collaborators that were doing the experimental part. And I would take data from the experiment and use it in my calculations. And oftentimes I had to explain what I was doing and how it worked and why to the experimentalists. And it didn't always kind of land the way that I wanted it to. So I had to really learn how to communicate the findings to different people coming from different backgrounds. I think it's the same thing when you go into machine learning. Not everyone may understand how a neural network works, but at the same time, you need people to, in a way, you need to build trust with people so that the application that you're building actually makes an impact to where you're trying to make an impact, right? So me and my team build a machine learning pipeline that helps predict the design of a small molecule or predict the binding energy of a molecule to a target protein. That really only makes a positive impact on pharma R&D if someone goes and uses it. So it's really important, I think, that you're able to communicate what you've done and why it can be trusted, or maybe even more importantly, what needs to be done to ensure that we can trust it.
That is an evergreen professional skill, I think, the ability to tell a story of your work and loop in stakeholders and explain to them in a way they understand. Because if you are, for example, a podcaster, it's very clear to you why your work is valuable, but to other people in the organization, it may not be. And so it's easy to take the import of your work for granted, or the understanding of the import of your work for granted. And particularly when you're dealing with really advanced technical things, you just cannot expect the people who, control your budget or the people who determine the direction of your product to understand at an infinite level what it is you do. So being able to loop in stakeholders is crucial. Can we talk about AI for science? I want to talk about this new initiative. I guess, what is the log line? Let's start at the very beginning, because there's this exciting new research initiative over at Microsoft. You are involved in the early stages. What is going on over there at AI for Science?
Yeah. So really what it comes down to is that we believe that deep learning could have a really transformational impact on the natural sciences. So that being biology, physics, and chemistry. And that impact could really dramatically improve our ability to model and predict the natural world. And that would go well beyond the traditional use of machine learning for statistical modeling of observational data. And we think this could represent a new paradigm of scientific discovery.
Could you give an example of some of the research that you think is pursuing that end?
Yeah, so I think it really comes down to, I guess, a new sort of frontier of scientific discovery that combines AI with quantum chemistry, physics, molecular biology. And I guess to understand that, you have to kind of start with what scientific discovery is today, right? So historically, science has evolved through what's been called four paradigms. So the first is purely empirical, and it's based directly on the observation of nature. So, for example, I eat this plant, I feel better. And apple falls on my head, and I come up with the concept of gravity. The second paradigm is theoretical. So you can start thinking about, now we have equations that come into place. So laws of motions, Maxwell's equations, things like that. And these are typically differential equations, and they describe the world around you. The third is when digital computers come into play in the 20th century. So now we can start to solve these equations for more complex systems, like forecasting the weather and other applications like that. And then the fourth paradigm is about data-intensive scientific discovery. So being able to collect, to store, to process large volumes of data. And that's where machine learning comes in to play a very important role there. So modeling and analyzing large volumes of experimental data. And those four paradigms so far are complementary and coexist together. However, those fundamental equations for sciences are well known, but their computation is extremely demanding, and most of the time you have to make an approximation to them. So, for example, in quantum chemistry, we use the Schrödinger equation. It's a partial differential equation that describes the behavior of molecules at the subatomic level with really high precision, but the solution with high accuracy is only possible for really, really small systems with just a few atoms. So, H2 hydrogen atoms bonded together, for example. And then scaling to a larger system requires you to approximate, which leads to this trade-off between scale and accuracy. But over the last few years, we're seeing a new way to exploit machine learning and particularly deep learning as a tool to address that speed versus accuracy trade-off for scientific discovery. So it's a different use of machine learning from collecting, storing, and then modeling observational data that we're familiar with, because the idea is that the data that's used to train a neural network would come from the solution to the equation of science rather than from observation. So then we're starting to think about, you can think of the traditional solver for a scientific equation as a simulator to the natural world. So that can be used to do things like forecast the weather or calculate the binding affinity of a candidate of a drug molecule to a target protein. But those simulations are computationally very, very expensive. So, for example, it can take months on a supercomputer to really simulate all the dynamics of a protein for just the equivalent of like a microsecond of real time. And they also kind of represent something very fixed that don't necessarily improve with experience. But from a machine learning perspective, the details of that simulation can be thought of as training data that can be then used to train something like a deep learning emulator. So in other words, you can use the inputs and the outputs of the simulation as training data for a new machine learning deep neural net, which can then learn to replicate or emulate that simulator. So it's kind of this input and output thing that we're trying to do. And then if you use that emulator many, many times, you're reducing the cost of generating that training data and the cost of training. And hopefully now you've created this fairly general purpose emulator that can run several orders of magnitude faster than a simulation itself.
So as you feed iterative simulations with the input and output from previous ones, how do you ensure accuracy? I'm afraid there's like a copy of a copy of a copy thing going on there, or is that a reductive way to look at it?
So I think because it's not looking at observational data, so training data would be perfectly labeled, and the quantity of that data is only going to be limited by the computational budget. So once it's trained, the emulator can perform a new calculation with much higher efficiency and hopefully improve in speed compared to something like a direct simulation.
To bring it into the real world a little bit, could you give an example of one of these emulators and then what sort of impact it has?
Yeah, so as I said, the idea is that we're kind of opening up this new door into actually very deep research. And that itself has huge potential to have important real world impact. So, for example, the number of small molecule drug candidates alone is estimated to be around 10 to the power of 60, while the total number of stable materials is around 10 to the power of 180. So finding more efficient ways to explore those spaces with emulators would really transform our ability to discover new molecules and materials. So, for example, better drugs to treat diseases, better substrates for capturing carbon dioxide, new materials for batteries, electrodes for fuel cells, and many more. So, some of the things we're working on right now, we've got a number of different partnerships. We're collaborating, for example, with another team here at Microsoft Research that's working on materials engineering for a carbon negative future. So they're applying the computational tools that we're building here in AI for Science to design new materials. So, for example, they're looking at, say, carbon removal. So how can we use something like a metallo-organic framework optimized using our machine learning algorithms or carbon utilization? So let's do something with the atmospheric carbon dioxide that we've captured rather than putting it into ground. So for example, making a new material for IT systems or anything similar to that, like biodegradable plastics or building materials.
Whoa. So it's sort of like it can optimize the use or creation of essentially anything that requires natural resources or matter, more accurately.
Yeah, so the idea is that we're finding new ways to discover new molecules, right, through these emulations. And then those molecules can go on to have impactful applications in a number of different industries. So that could be in environmental sustainability, it could be in catalysis, it could be in drug discovery. So we've got a collaboration with Novartis where we're working on building a pipeline of generative and predictive models. So that's really looking at how we speed up drug design and things like that.
It seems like this emulator approach could really be utilized anywhere data science is being done. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to think of an industry that's not actually using data science and machine learning at this point. It's really just made an impact across the globe, right? But now we're thinking about, okay, how do we apply machine learning to things at a more atomic scale? So actually looking at molecules. So how we apply deep learning, machine learning to actually be able to explore chemical space more effectively. And then that being able to build new applications in a number of different industries. And the idea is that it's used for the things that are going to make the most impact on the world. So solving healthcare challenges, combating disease, combating climate change, sustainability, things like that.
So while the possibilities are really endless for where you might point this approach, what does Microsoft want? Because it doesn't sound like it's new formulas for Excel, right? I guess what I'm asking is what is kind of the directive of AI for science? What does the outcome look like?
There's kind of three main goals. So, number one, Microsoft Research is here to do research, intellectually deep, impactful research. And so, AI for Science is about building that portfolio, and peer reviewed publications are going to be a key deliverable there. Second, as we are part of Microsoft, Microsoft is a company whose mission is really about empowering others to be successful. So we'll also be looking at how we can turn some of this research into cloud-based services that can then be used commercially or by academia. And the applications, as we said, is kind of enormous. So molecular simulation could be medicines, it could be fuel cells, it could be carbon capture, it could be catalysis, and many more. And then the third goal is really that real world impact. So, and being able to find the metric that's tied back to our research. So, healthcare, how have our emulators helped discover new medicines? Sustainability, so how has our research discovered new molecules and materials that can be used for a carbon negative future, and so on.
So what is your day like? I'm curious, like, how do you spend your time? What does the actual work look like when you crack open your laptop to participate in this toil? What are you kind of busying yourself with?
I think one of the reasons why I'm at Microsoft Research is because my background and my experience, and I guess part of my strengths, are building and growing data and machine learning teams. So our team here at AI for Science is incredibly smart. So we've got a lot of really big players in the deep learning world and people that come from a variety of different backgrounds. So some people coming from directly from academia, people coming from quantum physics, people coming from, really strong in the deep learning world, people coming from biology, healthcare. But I think what I bring to the table is really how do we make this a team? How do we make this an organization that has really clear goals and what we want to do and how we're going to build it and the culture that we want to build too. So it's all brand new, right? So I joined in July and we just have this amazing opportunity to build this new team and to, work with this blank canvas in a way and write the book on how we want to run this thing. And that's kind of my favorite place to be. It's a lot of fun and kind of thinking about how do we want to build this team? How do we want to grow it? What's the culture that we want to build? How do we want to set our goals and make everyone feel a part of it? And so that's kind of the idea and where we are now. So my typical day is really trying to build this thing, working with the people around me at all different levels, all different backgrounds to kind of understand, what is the sort of top down, bottom up approach we want to take to this. So we want to encourage freedom of research, but also think about, the bigger picture of where we're going and why it's important, and our mission and how we're actually going to get there and how we're going to measure our success along the way too.
Well, Bonnie, you are in an exciting opportunity because most people are either in academia or in the private sector, or they are in the private sector and they moonlight in the academic research world, and you get to do both at the same time. So it's just exciting hearing about your role and the awesome work you're doing over there. And as we creep up on optimal podcast length here, I would just say thank you so much for being with me today, Bonnie. I've loved learning from you today.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great to be here.
How AI Happens is brought to you by Sama. Sama provides accurate data for ambitious AI. Specializing in image, video, and sensor data annotation and validation for machine learning algorithms in industries such as transportation, retail, e-commerce, media, medtech, robotics, and agriculture. For more information, head to sama.com.